How powerful is Cox Fiber? Powerful enough to keep fans across the country in the action on the biggest game days of the year. Whether you're one of 65,000 fans at Allegiant Stadium or you're streaming the game at home with Cox Fiber from the company with America's fastest download speeds, whenever it matters most, Cox keeps you connected. Limited availability in select areas. Speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms and other restrictions may apply. Analysis by Ookla of Speed Test Intelligence data. Fixed median download speeds. US Q3 2023.
We're joined by Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com, national college football writer. Now, Max has teased this as you have some news, Dennis. What news do you have?
This is breaking. I can't recall this ever happening. The federal government, the Department of Justice, has joined a lawsuit against the NCAA that would basically free any players to transfer anytime, anywhere, any place.
Holy cow! Wow.
The attorney generals in 7 states had filed a lawsuit, and it became a temporary injunction which allows players to transfer in any sport without restriction for the rest of this semester. But the federal government, it's basically a fair labor practice in the Biden administration, but it is the Department of Justice, and it is significant. I think we have to start thinking about, if this current model stays intact, there will never be any restrictions against transferring ever again.
Well, that brings an old brain like mine can't handle all the questions that have come into it.
Neither.
So I guess the most simple question is there any chance that holds up? And you just mentioned it, the havoc and chaos that we already are seeing in college athletics would then obviously have no boundaries. Can it sustain itself in that scenario?
I think it can. I mean, I go back to when NIL started. A wise sage named Steve Sarkisian said, "It's like the dinosaurs. You either adapt or die." I mean, we can sit here and complain, not we, but people can sit here and complain about it's going to be the ruin of college sports. Well, there's one way to fix this, Bob. If you want to fix this right now, get with the players, collectively bargain, over working conditions, and as part of those working conditions, what you get in return is, for example, the players have to stay at a school for 2 years if they're in academically good standing. They have to play in any postseason game if they're healthy, and in return, whatever payment, whatever, I don't know, but that's what collective bargaining is. You can do it without having a union. So if people want a solution to this, there's your solution, because I think we're way down the line in, trying to hope that the NCAA fixes this, because this was headed that way anyway with what I just told you about the rest of this semester, and now the federal government's joined in.
Is this too fast? Did all of this happen too fast in college sports with the NIL and the transfer portal? I imagine there's, people still in college playing college sports in Division I that came in and really weren't thinking about either of these things. NIL never had to probably worry about that. And now we're talking about collective bargaining, lawsuits, and, things that might be a little bit over the head of some of these guys. Did all this happen too fast?
No. Look, this started, or the next iteration of this, the first iteration of this started in 2004 with the Ed O'Bannon lawsuit. And think about how simple that was. We all remember this lawsuit. Ed O'Bannon, former UCLA player, was on the cover of EA Sports college basketball video game. And he got to thinking, well, wait a minute. I didn't sign off on that. I should be getting compensated. That's my image. That's my likeness. I own that. And he went to court over it. The NCAA fought it for years. It was like a 12-year battle. The NCAA lost in court. And that led to NIL. I always tell people, when the pot of money, unregulated money, if you will, got so big, it was bound to draw the attention of lawyers and billable hours. And that may be crass, but it's true. And so now, the lawyer representing the plaintiffs in one of the most in a lawsuit that could bring down the NCAA by as soon as next year. It's called the House versus NCAA. His name is Jeffrey Kessler. And I won't bother you with the details. Just know this. Jeffrey Kessler sued the NFL and created the NFL Players Association. That's the kind of, power we're talking about in some of these lawsuits. So the NCAA can change, or they can have it changed for them. And this is the next step in that, having an outside force change it for them.
Talking with Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com. Before I ask you a question related to football, you were formerly at the Kansas City Star back in what years, Dennis? Were you at the Star?
81 to 89, yeah, my formative years. Recall it well.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've already answered my question. I was going to ask if there was a time when you, Whitlock, Poznansky, Passon, and Kirchhoff were there at the same time. So you came a little before a few of those people.
Yeah, no. Tom Chattel, who you know, and I left in 89 to go to the late, great St. Louis Sun. It lasted exactly 9 months. April 25th, 2010, I think is when it folded. It was terrible. But then Blair Kirchhoff and Jeff Flanagan were brought in to replace. I don't want to say replace us, but to replace those positions. Blair is still there in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame, well deserved. Jeff Flanagan, I don't know. He covered the Royals for years at the Star, and so that's part of my legacy. Those guys have done much greater things than I have.
Oh, don't sell yourself short. So here's my football question. We've seen kind of an exchange of coaches, kind of a musical chairs. We've seen Kalen DeBoer go to Alabama. We've seen Jedd Fisch go from Arizona to Washington. Why is, and I think I know the answer to this, but why is Washington a better job than Arizona? I know they just played the national championship game.
It's a much better job, more resources. You go by living alumni, whatever that means. There's a lot more of those. And I always use the differentiator. It's won a national championship in football. So no matter how many years ago that was, there's that standard. We have won it. We can win it again. And obviously this year, Washington was 60 minutes away, didn't get there, lost to Michigan. But it's a state university. Arizona shares resources with Arizona State in that state. In fact, I'm not sure. I think Arizona State's the land grant, but I'm not sure in that state. And then Washington does too, with Washington State and others. But it's got much bigger, I would say, football history than maybe Arizona.
Yeah. Have you ever said something that you wish you could have back immediately?
Every day.
When we were writers, we could just, backspace. Can't do that as broadcasters.
No, those tweets live wherever. You can delete them, but they live. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about Kalen DeBoer, and when he got the Alabama job, I and probably a lot of other people thought about the geography, and he's been mostly on the West Coast, and now he's going to the SEC, and will he be able to adapt? Was that ever a valid way of thinking, and is it outdated now with NIL and particularly the transfer portal where you can basically get guys from anywhere, anytime?
Well, say the question again. You broke up a little bit. Go ahead.
Does the geography of a coach moving from the West Coast to the SEC is that a valid concern?
Oh, in terms of winning at Alabama. Well, look.
And being able to recruit there and having roots and everything like that.
Well, that's certainly a concern, isn't it? It has to be. Big picture, though, I think two things are true. And I wrote this last week. Alabama absolutely got their guy. He was the best name left on the board, 25-3 at 2 years of Washington, 3 national championships in NAIA, all this, great staff. This is also true. does Kalen DeBoer know what he's getting into? And that's what you're talking about. Recruiting, coaching, being able to build an offensive and defensive line that could compete in that league, which is really where this whole thing starts. If you can't man up there, you can't compete. And now we see that Alabama has lost 27 players, 20 into the portal, including 2 freshman All-Americans, and 7 players that decommitted. And I don't have to tell you how good Alabama's recruiting class is. I guess some of that was expected, but this is a symptom of something that's never happened before. The best coach ever retiring, and as we've just mentioned, unfettered player freedom. They can go whenever, wherever they want. Those two things have never happened together before. So if you put them together, I guess I'm not surprised that it happened at Alabama.
Talking with Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com, their lead college football writer. So you recently wrote about what happens at Michigan if Jim Harbaugh leaves. He's certainly interviewing for some NFL jobs. It seems to me Sharon Moore, who kind of had a test while Harbaugh was suspended, would certainly be a top candidate. You wrote that. But do you think he would be the guy, and do you think Harbaugh ultimately will leave Michigan?
As we sit here right now, I think he'd be the guy that they would elevate, given what's happening around college football. When you have a guy in-house, it's really the only way you can go right now. I mean, I put the possibilities in there, but, the number 2 guy is Brian Kelly. Would Brian Kelly go? He might, but I think you give Sharon Moore, because he's been there, I'm going to say 6 years now, because he shepherded the program through turbulent times, self-inflicted by Jim Harbaugh with all those suspensions. He was 4-0 as a game day acting coach, and is a darn good offensive coordinator and recruiter. Now, the downside is, and he's from Derby. That's probably why you're asking. You know that. He's from Derby.
Exactly.
He's from Butler. Yeah, he went to Butler, recalls it fondly. I talked to him at the Rose Bowl. Played with Zach Taylor, head coach of the Bengals, a bunch of other guys, and seems competent. But again, at that level, having never been a head coach, there's a learning curve. And I'm sure there's people at Michigan that want an established coach. But at this point, I don't know if you're going to get Brian Kelly. I don't know if you're going to get some of those other guys. So he's about the best option. I don't say he's a fallback, because I think they would elevate him right away. Now, your second question about Jim Harbaugh, let me flip a coin. That's a day-to-day proposition with him. At the same time, we know he's interviewed with at least 2 teams. He is negotiating a 9-figure deal at Michigan. So, I mean, somebody tell me. I'm not sure. I try to find out, but I think only in his mind, maybe his wife, he knows what he's going to do.
So, Dennis, if I put $100 on one of the Kansas schools winning the Big 12 next year, I know we're way far off from that.
Yeah.
And $100 on a team not in the Big 12 this past season, so I guess that would be Utah or Arizona most likely winning the Big 12. Which one do you think is more likely to pay off?
Well, this is one of my favorite off-season stories, because I think it's fascinating. Look, somebody has to win the Big 12, right? And in a 12-team playoff, that winner is probably going to be in the playoffs and done something it's never done before. Play for a national championship within the 12-team structure. I get that. But if you're Arizona, even with the new coach, they're going to apparently keep their best receiver in quarterback. That gives them a fighting chance. Kansas State, even Kansas, Utah, whoever emerges, they're going to be doing something they've never done before. Because 11-2 in the Big 12 is going to get you in the playoff. It's at least the top 5 and maybe the top 6 ranked conference champions are going to be automatic. That hasn't been decided yet. So I think that's the big picture here instead of either or, that the Big 12 is assured of having, TCU played 2 years ago, is assured of having almost an unprecedented champion and look at the championship.
Final question for Dennis Dodd from CBSSports.com. So every job that comes open, Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold seem to be mentioned for. They always say, I'm not leaving. I believe them. I think they're veteran coaches who are very happy where they are, and as long as those schools continue to perform well, I do think they will finish out their coaching careers at their respective schools. Do you buy that?
I do, unless something goes south, which it doesn't look like it is. They're both at places where they can go 8-4 every year, and in good years, again, can compete for the playoff. Now that it's expanded, they're getting paid handsomely now. You know, Lance Leipold, every time his name comes up, he gets a raise, and good for him and his agent. So his go to, I don't know what his name's been attached to really everything Lance has, and probably Chris. Think about that. They are, beyond Lawrence and Manhattan. They're thought of as two of the best coaches in the country, and I don't disagree. But there are places where they're not going to throw a brick through your window if you go 5-7, or harass you on social media, or get after your kids in school. And we've seen all this, guys. We've seen this throughout the country. So why not be at a place, especially at Kansas, where they're going to build a statue of Lance Leipold if he goes 8-4 the rest of his career? You know that. There's already a statue at Kansas State, and Chris Kleiman living up to Bill Snyder's legacy tremendously. So I think that's it. I mean, I think in this day and age where you still have to figure out, again, NIL, transfer portal, pay for play on a daily basis, the known evil at where you are is better than trying to do it somewhere else. And I think, I haven't talked to them about that, but I think that's where their heads are at. But I think the fan bases for both should be absolutely giddy, because this is a new age, because I think these guys are going to be around a long time. I think they're going to compete for championships. Quick note, they absolutely are really good friends with each other. I know Wildcats and Jayhawks don't want to hear that, but they're doing an NIL thing, I think in March here in Kansas City, where you can buy tickets for $5,000 and eat at a really fancy steak place. And the money will be split between the two collectives at the school. I've never heard of that happening either, so that's kind of cool.
No. All right. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show. And just forget about that Arizona-Washington question if you don't mind.
That's all right. No, that's all right. We don't get out on the West Coast, but they got Don James. Don James may have as big a coaching tree or bigger than Nick Saban.
All right,
and you talk about
please.
Gary Pinkel. Nick Saban himself goes back to Don James. That was his coach at Toledo. So, Washington definitely better.
Thank you, Dennis. We'll talk to you soon,
all right,
okay?
Man. All right, see ya.
How powerful is Cox Internet? Powerful enough to keep fans across the country in the action on the biggest game days of the year. Whether you're one of 65,000 fans at Allegiant Stadium, or you're streaming the game at home with America's fastest download speeds powered by fiber. Whenever it matters most, Cox keeps you connected. Cox Internet is connected to the premises via coaxial connection. Speeds vary and are not guaranteed. Cox terms and other restrictions may apply. Analysis by Ookla of Speed Test Intelligence data. Fixed median download speeds. US Q3 2023.